Okay. Tonight's shiur, Ilu Nishma Lavi Mori Dove Bear Meir Benuven Alevi Imi Marti Rachel Bad Harav Michael. And tonight, this Shabbos, I should say, before we get to tonight, this Shabbos, we have the privilege of completing the fourth of the five books of the Torah, the Sefer Bamidbar, with the reading of two nice short parshiot, which together make one nice long parsha, Matot and Mas'say, the longest reading of the year, longest Torah reading. Lots of different topics to choose from. But tonight we're going to talk about the first one that appears in the parasha, which really we're not even going to get into the topic. We're going to really talk about the intro to the topic. So let's go right to our sources. We're basically going to be spending our tonight discussing basically the first pasuk of Parshat Matos. That's what we're going to talk about. But to give you a little bit of background, just to give us where we're up to, I quoted a few more of the psukim. So the first pasuk says, "Vayidaber Moshe al Roshei Hamatot," that Moshe spoke to the heads of the tribes, Livnei Yisrael, of the tribes of Bnei Yisrael, saying, "Lemor, Zeh Davar Asher Tiva Hashem." This is the word that Hashem has commanded. And the Parshinim are going to focus on this because normally when we have a parsha that's going to give us a mitzvah, it begins with that very famous phrase, "Avayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor," or some variation thereof. "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe vel Aaron," "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe b'Har Sinai," "Be'eretz Mitzrayim." But some variation of that pasuk is generally how a mitzvah is introduced, and this clearly is introducing a whole set of mitzvah. That's why I just brought down a couple of the next psukim. The chapter that follows this verse is Ish Kiyo Doneder Lashem O Ishavash Sorry Nafsho. If a person should make an oath or a vow to forbid something to himself, Lo Yachel Dvaro, he shall not Yachel his words. I'm not going to translate Yachel because we're going to see the Parshinim are going to have two different variations on what Yachel means. But Kachal Yotzei Mipiv Yaseh should do whatever he has spoken to do. And similarly, if a woman also makes an oath, again, to forbid something to herself that is permitted. That is what a neder is. A neder is, I say, that something that should be permitted, this kosher food, this book, this whatever it might be, I'm not allowed to use it for whatever reason. That's why I decide that, why I want to take that oath. Great question. We're not going to get into the psychology of it. I don't want to. But the fact is that the whole parsha then gives 15 psukim discussing, is the woman married? Is she single? Is she underage? Is she overage? Where is she at in her life? And who, if anyone, has jurisdiction over her to abrogate her vow, to nullify it completely, that as though it never existed. And then the whole section ends. Eila HaChukim, these are the different laws. Asher Tziva Hashem et Moshe, that Hashem commanded Moshe. Bein Ish Lishto, between a man and his wife. Bein Av Levito, between a father and his daughter. Bein Ne'ura, during her youth. B'Beit Avio, and she is still in her father's house. And again, as I said, if we would go into the particulars of the halacha, we would find that there are certain periods of time where a father has the ability to nullify, to not, it's not nullify, it's not the same as hatarat nedarim. It's lahafer, means to completely uproot any oath that his daughter makes. And similarly, a husband has that privilege with certain oaths that his wife makes. I'm going to leave it at that because I really want to get into the whole intro, the way the Torah introduces this parsha, that we don't have Vayidaber Hashem Moshe lemor here. So first, we're going to go into other places in the Torah where we have this phraseology of Zeh Davar Asher Tiva Hashem. You'll notice I've highlighted that in yellow because that seems to be the key verse. This is the word that Hashem has commanded, as opposed to the Vayidaber Hashem Moshe lemor. That seems to take the place of Vayidaber Hashem Moshe lemor. So other places we have it is by the man. It actually appears twice in the story of the man. This is in Shemot, Perek Tet Zayin, in Parshat B'Shalach. The first is Bnei Yisrael complain for food. They go out. Moshe says, "Go out and collect the food." Vayiru Bnei Yisrael. Bnei Yisrael see that this food outside. Vayomu Ish Alachiv Manu. They say to each one, says, what is it? Man. Kilo yadu mahu. They didn't know what it was, so they gave it this name man, which is from the word ma. Vayomer Moshe Alehem, Moshe says to them, clearly who he's speaking to, is, this is the bread that Hashem has given you. That same phrase that we had at the beginning of the pasuk in our parsha, clearly Hashem is introduced by Moshe, who Moshe is speaking to. He's clearly speaking to Bnei Yisrael. Vayomer Moshe Alehem. That's what this pasuk says. That's why our appearance it tells who Moshe is speaking to, but it's not Bnei Yisrael. It's only the Rashi Matot. It's only the leaders of the tribes. Every other time we're going to have this phrase, Zadavar Asher Tzivah Hashem, we're going to see a reference to all of Am Yisrael. So that's going to be one of the focuses of what we're going to talk about tonight. Again, later on, Vayomer Moshe Zadavar Asher Tzivah Hashem. This is what Hashem commands. Concerning the man, we're supposed to take one measure of man and put it aside for all generations. That man is sitting somewhere with the Aron, somewhere where it was buried. It's still there, waiting for us to discover it, or Mashiach to discover it when he gets here to show us again the man. What is the lesson of the man? That Hashem can provide for us, even if it's not raining. Even if it's not, Hashem provides for our needs, sometimes in a what we call natural way, a natural miracle, and sometimes in a supernatural miracle. But Hashem always provides our basic needs. Okay, the next time we have this phrase is when it comes to the building of the Mishkan. And again, introduces it by Yomer Moshe El Kol Adat B'nei Yisrael Lemor. He speaks to the entire congregation. Zadavar Asher Tzivah Hashem Lemor. Kumeitchem Truma, take Truma. All of these things that we're going to need to build the Mishkan. But again, in each of these cases, this Zadavar Asher Tzivah Hashem is introduced by the fact that he's speaking to Bnei Yisrael, clearly. In Vayikra, when it comes to inaugurating the Mishkan and the Kohanim, we are told, Vayomer Moshe El Ha'edah. Again, he speaks to the Eidah, Zadavar Asher Tzivah Hashem Lasos. This is what Hashem wants us to do. And then he brings Aaron and he anoints him, he gives him the Begadim. And similarly, when it comes to bringing the Karbanot on the 8th day, after they've completed their 7 days of Miluim, similarly, the entire Eidah is congregated and standing before Hashem, and Moshe says that this is what Hashem has commanded. Again, all of these intros of Asher Zadavar Asher Tzivah Hashem, every one of them is introduced by the fact that he's talking to all of Klal Yisrael. Similarly, here's another one. This one, interestingly enough, this is the chapter in Vayikra Perek Yud Zayin that deals with the mitzvah called Shchutei Chutz. That if a person wants to bring a karban to Hashem, has to be brought to the Beit HaMikdash. Can't be slaughtered outside the precincts of the Beit HaMikdash and then you can bring the karban as dead. It's got to be brought alive into the Beit HaMikdash, slaughtered there, and then is whatever has to be done. That's this chapter that this one is dealing with. But it's introduced with Vayidaber Hashem Moshe Lemor, and then he says, Daber al Aaron v'Abanav el Kol Bnei Yisrael v'Amart Lehem Zadavar Asher Tzivah Hashem Lemor. This is what Hashem has commanded us. Okay, the next time we have this phrase is, and the final time, is at the end of our parsha, actually the end of the second parsha, the end of Parshat Mas'say, where the tribe of Menashe comes and complains to Moshe, if the daughters of Tzlafchan, you told us we got to give them land, if they marry somebody in a different tribe, the land's going to move to a different tribe and we never get it back. So it's Vayitzav Moshe at Bnei Yisrael al pi Hashem Lemor. Again, Moshe commands Bnei Yisrael through the wealth of Hashem. Yes, they are right. Zadavar Asher Tzivah Hashem. Again, this is what Hashem has commanded. So we see a number of other times where this phrase Zadavar Asher Tzivah Hashem, it's always connected to Moshe teaching a law to all of Bnei Yisrael, as opposed to our time, where it seems, if I read our verse, it says that Moshe is to speak to the Rashi Matot Bnei Yisrael. That's it. The leaders of the tribes are the only one he's going to teach this halakha to, if I look at the literal translation. So let's first see, as we usually do, we go to Rashi first, and see how Rashi sees this playing out. So what does it mean by that Rashi Matot? So Rashi says, Rashi Matot is cholak kavod l'nesiim, that Hashem is giving special honor to the heads of the tribes, the nesiim, l'lamdam techila, that they are the first ones to learn the new halacha. And then, even though the pasuk doesn't say he's to teach this to all of Bnei Yisrael, he has to teach it after he teaches the tribal leaders. He has to teach it to all of Bnei Yisrael. Uminayin, and Rashi says, how do I know that the same thing holds true with every single one of the mitzvot that Hashem commanded Moshe to teach to Am Yisrael was taught first to the Nesi'im, and then only then was taught to all of Am Yisrael. Talmud Lomar, and he brings a verse, a pasuk that tells us the following: Vayoshuvu elav Aharon v'chol Nesi'im bo'edah v'yidaber Moshe alehem. When Moshe comes down with the second luchot, Aharon and all of the Nesi'im come to sit in front of Moshe. V'yidaber Moshe alehem. Moshe speaks to them. And then all of Am Yisrael comes forward, and Moshe commands them all that Hashem has commanded them. So Rashi wants to tell us that this two words, Rashei Matot, are added in here to tell us that with every single mitzvah in the Torah, that the way it was taught to Am Yisrael was first the leaders learned it, the heads of the tribe, and then everybody else learned it. And that happens all the time, not just here. So the question is, why do we wait till here, or we're almost at the end of the Torah, to tell us this? Why isn't this? Should have been right up front. This, if that's the way it was always taught. What is the purpose Rashi wants to know of specifically here, singling out the Rashei Matot, the leaders of the tribes? Lamad is to teach us, is to hint to us this special rule, shafarat nidarim biyachid mumcha, that if I have a single individual who is an expert in nidarim, he is allowed to question a person who's taken a neder, an oath, and is allowed to nullify that oath. This is our classic tarat nidarim. Even though Rashi uses the word hafarat nidarim, it is not hafarat nidarim, it is hatarat nidarim. There are two different ways an oath can be undone. One is called hafarat nidarim, and that can only be done by either the husband or father, depending on what age and what the marital circumstances of a female is, and hatarat nidarim, which is when I, the maker of the vow, regret that I've made it. I come to a bet din or a single expert in nidarim and ask them to please repeal the vow, that it shouldn't chal. But if there is no, in my neighborhood, my town, there's no individual who is an expert, Mayfair be shlosha het yotot. I can go before a panel of 3 ordinary individuals and ask them to rescind my vow. Oh, because that's what Rashi says is potentially the reason why it mentions the Rashei Matot specifically in this chapter that deals with vows, because it wanted to teach by saying that Moshe first taught this to the 12 tribal leaders, that a single tribal leader, person from that tribe, wants to go and get his vow annulled, can go to the single tribal leader. That's what it alludes to. Oh, Yachol, or perhaps, Rashi says, Shalom or Moshe Parsha Zuel and Nesiim Bilvad. Maybe the phraseology is exactly as it's taken literally, that Moshe is only to teach this chapter to the Nesiim alone, not to the all of Am Yisrael. How do we know that that's not the case, Rashi says? Because Nemar Khan, in our parsha, it says Zeh Davar. This is the word Asher Tziva Hashem. The Nemar Bishchutei Chutz, and then the chapter that we quoted above in Vayikra Yud Zayin, which talks with slaughtering animals outside of the precincts of the Beit HaMikdash, it also uses the same phraseology of Zeh Davar. Malahalan, and just like over there, it was Nemrali Aaron Ulavana V'Lechol B'nei Yisrael. It was spoken to Aaron and his sons and all of Am Yisrael. Shenemar, as the pasuk there says, Daber al Aaron v'Albanav Kol B'nei Yisrael. Af Zu Nemra Lekula. And by the way, the Gemara goes a step further. I didn't want to bring the Gemara down that says that, by the way, that when Moshe would have a halacha that he had to teach, first he would teach it to Aaron. Then he would teach it to Aaron and his sons. Then he would teach it to Aaron, his sons, and the tribal leaders. And then finally, the 4th time he would teach it to Aaron, his sons, the tribal leaders, and all of Am Yisrael. And then Moshe would leave. And Aaron would get up and teach it another time to his sons, the tribal leaders, and all of Am Yisrael. Then his sons would have to teach it again to the tribal leaders of Am Yisrael, and the tribal leaders would teach Am Yisrael. So that everybody got everything reinforced 4 times at every halacha, so that it would sink in. It wasn't just, okay, here's the halacha, bye, have a nice day. So this was how the Torah was taught in the desert during the time of Moshe. At least that's what the Gemara says. So here Rashi is proving from the different verses that applies to this law also. Parenthetical thought: why the language of Zeh Davar? Why is it Zeh Davar Asher Tziva Hashem? Rashi says this is to give special recognition to Moshe. Moshe nitnabe b'cho amar Hashem kechatzot halayla. Moshe, like many of the prophets, sometimes prophesies begins his words with Cho amar Hashem. This is what Hashem says. And many prophets prophesize using that language, Ko Amar Hashem. This is what Hashem says. So now Moshe is greater than all the other prophets. Why? Because he is added in that Shenitnabe B'Lashon Zeh Davar. He also begins his prophecy with Zeh Davar. None of the other Nevi'im do that. All the other Nevi'im either begin with Ko Hashem or such what Hashem says, but never Zeh Davar. They don't use that Lashon. Davar Acher. Another possible way of looking at this phrase of Zeh Davar, Zeh Davar Miudhu, Zeh Davar, this is the word. That means it's to exclude something. Lomar, to teach us. Shachacham, which the law I just said, Hacham b'lashon hatara, ubal b'lashon hafara. That when a single judge, an expert Nadarim, wants to abrogate or nullify a vow, he has to use a lashon of hatara. Zeh mutar lach, it's hatara. Ubal, but if it's a husband or the father, has to use lashon hafara. It is mufar, it is abrogated. It's as if it never existed. Kiloshin hakatuv kan, just like it says here with the father or with the husband, it says yafer otam. He had to use lashon hafara. Vimcholfu, if they switch, if the court or the individual uses a lashon hafara, it doesn't do any good. If the Baal, the father, or the husband say hatara, it doesn't work. It's only if the Baal or the father says hafara, but if and the judge has to say hatara. Those two are not interchangeable. They are two different ways of causing the vow not to be valid. One is basically the husband or the father says, no, you had no right to make that vow, whereas the court says, okay, you made that vow, but we are going to say you regret it, and therefore it's nullified. So there are two different procedures, and that's exactly what Rashi wants to say. If they switch, if they use the wrong language, doesn't help. You got to use the exact, precise language in Hatarat Nidarim or Hafarat Nidarim. Okay, let's go back to Rashbam. Rashbam wants to know again, very interesting. Nishalti be'inyov b'chrach Lushdon. Don't ask me where Lushdon is. Don't ask me where Inyov is. But there are two places, obviously, that Rashbam or it's one is, I guess, Inyov is the province, and Lushdon it seems to be the city within the province that he was visiting. He was asked the following question: Lefi Pshat, simple interpretation of the verse says that he's only supposed to teach the leaders of the tribe. We don't find any other parsha in the Torah that has this type of language. Shalom Nemar Lamala. It doesn't begin with Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe Lemor. Why doesn't it start with Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Lemor Ishki Yardonedo? What's this? Vaydaber Moshe Hashem Matot Mas'say. Where's the Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Lemor? The Eich Matchelet HaParsha B'Diburo Shel Moshe She'ein Meforish Klo Mipi Gvura. How can the parsha begin with Moshe speaking? This is what Hashem said. When did Hashem tell him that? What did he do? He made it up. He heard Hashem speak, but doesn't say Hashem spoke to him. Vizu chuvati, and this was the answer I gave to the person who asked me this. Lamala, above, in the end of last week's parsha, at the end of the chapter of the Karbanot Musafim, it says the following. It says, Eile tasul Hashem b'moadechem. These are the Karbanot Musaf that you are to offer to Hashem on all of your chagim, on all of your appointed chagim. Levad, in addition to excluding mididrechem, midvotechem, your offerings that you bring as nidarim and nidavot, that are through oaths and through voluntary contributions. Shatem tzrichim lavi b'echad mishlosh regalim, that you have to bring all of when a person, individual, makes an oath or a pledge to bring a korban, he has to bring it on the shalosh regalim, the next regel that shows up, mishum bal te'acher, because we have a halacha that says a person is not allowed to delay bringing his korbanot. When a person makes an oath, a vow that he's going to bring a korban, he has to do it immediately at the next chag that comes up, so that he shouldn't forget it. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah derives. Halach Moshe. So now Moshe, after teaching that law of the Moadim, Halach Moshe v'dibero Roshei Matot. So now Moshe speaks to the heads of the tribes, Shehem Shoftim, all of whom were judges, Lehorot liYisrael hilchot nidarim, that they have to teach Am Yisrael the laws of nidarim. The Amar Lahem, and what does he say? HaKadosh Baruch Hu tziva li, Hashem commanded me, sheyikrevu hanidreim v'nidvotam beregel, that they should bring, whenever they bring a pledge, they should bring it at the next chag, pen yachu nidreim, so that they should not delay paying off their pledges. Lefikach, therefore, the parsha begins with that Moshe speaks to the heads of the tribes and says, Ishki yidor neder l'Hashem, if he should bring a neder, i.e., what type of oath? A korban. Or he shavash shmuel. Let's I know not show. Okay. Or let's sorry. Either he makes a something I'm going to do, or something I am not going to do. Lo yachel devaro. Now, lo yachel devaro musav al haneder. Lo yachel devaro. Rashi and others generally translate lo yachel devaro as he should not profane. The word yachel comes from the word chulin, that it should not make it ordinary. In other words, if he says, whatever he says, he should keep as though it's a holy utterance. When you make an utterance, an oath to God, you made a holy utterance, you must keep it. Rashbam says, no, lo yachel devaro is not from the word chulin, it's a different root. Musav al haneder, it's referring to an oath that one made to bring a korban. What does lo yachel mean? Kolomar lo yacher et nidro. He should not delay to bring the oath of the korban that he is vowed to bring. He should not delay. Ad le'achar ha'regalim kimo shetzivam hakadosh baruch hu. Just like Hashem commanded that lo yacher devaro, he should not delay in bringing his neder. So that's what lo yachel devaro means. Shekain perush lo yachel. What does lo yachel mean? Rashbam says, Kimo vayachel ad bosh, that he waited until something happened. Vayachel od shivat yamim. When Noah sends forth the dove, it says he waited another 7 days. Vayachel is the word it uses there. Yachel Yisrael al Hashem. Hashem should wait patiently for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Hashem. What does that mean? Yamtin. All of these words with vayachal, lo yachel, the same root, means yamtin, v'yachakelo. You should be patient and wait for it to come. V'amefarish lashon chilul, l'fi apshat ta'utu biyado. And somebody who wants to say that lo yachel dvaro is from the root lechalel, to profane, it's a mistake. That's what Rashbam says. He has to do whatever he spoke to do. This goes back to a person who makes an oath to bring a korban. Exactly as he said. In other words, if he made a pledge to give X, he can't give Y in its place. He's got to give the same korban that he has said at the time he made the shvuah. And he has to do it according to the time, what he was thinking when he said it. Hein karov, hein rachok. It doesn't matter whether it was close, it was just yesterday, whether the chag is today or it's next week, or whether it's far away. V'raya ledavar, and the proof is kinyan shnei dvarim alalu pirish Moshe b'mishnah Torah. Comparable to these two things, one being a positive that I'm taking an oath to bring a korban pledge, the other that I'm taking an oath to forbid something, is also we see Hashem has Moshe, when he repeats the law of Nidarim in Dvarim, he has two different ways of phrasing it. Ki tidor neder l'Hashem Elokecha lo ta'acher l'shamo. First, you shouldn't delay to pay it. And second, lo tas v'sachot tishmar v'yosita, that you should, whatever you uttered from your lips, you should be wary and should be guard to do. So each of these represents to one. The kidor neder that we have over there, lo ta'acher l'shamo, is kinyan ish kidor neder. That corresponds in our verse to a person who makes an oath. So again, Rashbam says our verse corresponds to that verse in Dvarim, that it's referring to positively bringing a korban. Don't delay when you've made a pledge to bring a korban. Bechor Shor. Now, Bechor Shor again wants to understand the context of why Rashi Matot. Moshe, he explains the following. Moshe in last week's parsha appoints Yoshua as the new leader. He gives him a chizuk. He tziva Moshe at Yoshua. He gives him a command that you're going to be the new leader. You got to be strong. Vizarzo, and he warns him. Hero al Yisrael, and he warns him that you got to be in charge. Don't let them run all over you. Diber Gamel Rashi Matot. He also spoke to the leaders of the tribe. Lanhiget Yisrael derech yashar, to lead Am Yisrael in the appropriate way. Lekayem nidreihem ma sheyidru lifnei makom. That Am Yisrael has to fulfill whatever they promised to do before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we say, as we have similarly, Shlomo, as Shlomo in Kohelet writes, Al titenet picha lachtiat bisarecha. Don't cause your mouth to cause your body to sin. In other words, by saying I'm going to do X and not doing it, you didn't have to say it. If you didn't say it, you wouldn't have sinned. By saying it, you've caused yourself to sin. It's not this guy. It's not enough that we have to fill all the mitzvot that Hashem gave us. Also, whatever Am Yisrael command accepts upon themselves to do beyond the letter of the law, above and beyond the letter of the law, they have to keep that too. Once you have said you're going to do it, you're committed to do it, you have to do it. But the thing that's interesting is that Bechor Shor puts this in the context of this is the role of the tribal leaders, that they have to teach Am Yisrael this law. And so even though it's Vaydaber Moshe Rashi Matot, Bechor Shor is translating it that Moshe doesn't teach this law to all Am Yisrael, that he teaches it to the tribal heads, that their job is to teach this and be role models for living this for making their words be what they mean. Okay, Ramban. Vaydaber Moshe Rashi Matot. Again, same question. Lo iktim hakosef lo bar b'chan vaydaber Moshe lemor daber Rashi Matot yomar toleihem. Why doesn't it begin with Vaydaber Hashem Moshe lemor k'moshe amar parsha shkutei chutz, as we saw in the parsha of bringing a korban outside of Beit HaMikdash, that it says Vaydaber Hashem Moshe lemor daber el Aaron v'el banav v'el kol bnei Yisrael. Speak to them. Why here? Ubishar parshiot, and in many other places where it says Vaydaber Hashem Moshe lemor. Why is it missing here? Aval hiskir zeh b'sof haparsha. In the end, it will tell us that Hashem commanded this to Moshe. Amar elach chukim asher tzivah Hashem et Moshe. These are the things that Hashem commanded Moshe. Ubeparshat vahi bayom hashmini, and when it came to the inauguration of the Mishkan in Parshat Shmini, also it says vayomer Moshe zeh davar asher tzivah Hashem tasu. This is the word that Hashem has commanded that you should do. And it doesn't mention where Hashem commanded him this. Parshat Haman. Similarly in Parshat Haman, this is the thing that Hashem commanded, to fill a jar with man, so that every generation will be able to see it. So in all of these cases, we have Moshe teaching something to Am Yisrael, saying, this is what Hashem commanded, but we don't find anywhere that there's a pasuk that says Hashem commanded that to Moshe. So that's exactly what Ramban wants to know. Why? The Rashi Hamatot. Now these tribal heads, Livnei Yisrael, Haim Nisi'ei Hatigalim. These are the tribal leaders that stood by the each flag, that they were in charge of each tribe. Shemidu otam hamatot al digleihem. They were the ones who were now in charge of the tribal banner, the leader of the tribe. Achar shemetu Nachshon ben Aminadav v'chaverav. After, remember, we're 40 years later. The tribal leaders that we read about in Parshat Bamidbar, the ones that brought the Karbanot in Parshat Nasi, they all died out. 40 years have passed by. They're gone. So obviously they appointed new tribal leaders. When they died, they had to appoint new tribal leaders. That's who we're talking about, Ramban says. The Efshar, and it's entirely possible, Ramban says, later on in Parshat Mas'say, we're going to see a bunch of people listed as these are the heads of the tribes to help divide up Eretz Yisrael. Perhaps Ramban says that's who these Roshei Hamatot are, one and the same. Who are going to be listed later on in Parshat Mas'say as the ones who are in charge of dividing up the land. Oh, show you Acherim, or perhaps there were others. Maybe the ones in Parshat Mas'say aren't the tribal leaders. They were given the job of the tribal dividers, the land dividers, whereas there were other tribal leaders. But in any case, they were the people who stood instead of the ones who were at the beginning 40 years ago who have died out. Perhaps Ramban says that obviously that when they get into Eretz Yisrael, there have to be leaders of each tribe. Now, whether they are the same as the ones who divide up the land or not, he doesn't comment. He says maybe they were, maybe they weren't. Vitam. So now we know who they were. Why? Vitam be'idaber Moshe Roshei Hamatot. Why does Moshe speak only, according to Ramban, only to the leaders of the tribes when he's teaching the laws of Nedarim? Ki ein sorech lelamed l'chol b'nei Yisrael sha'av abal yichol lafer nidrei inu nefesh. There is no need to teach all of Am Yisrael that the father and the husband have the right to annul certain vows. The ulai tzarich lahalim, and perhaps Moshe really does not want this to become in public knowledge that this right exists. Why? Why doesn't Moshe want these laws of Nedarim to be publicized that you can annul a vow or can you abrogate a vow? If everybody, the entire population knows that you can get an oath nullified, I'll make an oath, big deal. So I'll get it nullified if I don't feel like doing it. So they will treat oaths very, very leniently, very, very casually. They will not attach importance to them. Therefore, Israel, Therefore, Moshe only was told to share this halacha with the heads of the tribes, the intellectual elite. Even though in every other law of the Torah it's taught to all of Am Yisrael, this specific law, because it contains a quote legal loophole of Hatarat Nedarim, Moshe did not want to teach it to everybody because he was afraid it would cause more harm than good. And that's why he teaches it only to the Roshei Hamatot. The Yirmoz Od L'Midrash Rabotenu. The verbiage also hints to that which the Chazal teaches in the Nedarim. Ki l'Roshei Hamatot Yad V'Shem b'Nedarim Yoter Misha'ar Ha'am. That the leaders of the tribe have more of a vested interest in the laws of Nedarim than the rest of the people. Why? Because of this special law that a single expert can annul a vow. However, this whole concept that you can take a vow and you can nullify it, which we are very familiar with because that's what the whole tefillah of Kol Nidre is all about, plus the fact that we say this tefillah called Hatarat Nedarim generally on Erev Rosh Hashanah. We get it in front of 3 people and we say this whole long nusach of any neder that I made, and they say yes, it's all mufar, kol yu mutarim lach. They say all the lashonot, and this whole concept that a neder can be rescinded. Loni parsha b'Torah. There's nowhere in the Torah that the whole concept of Hatarat Nedarim even appears in the Torah. It's a tradition that was transmitted to Moshe orally, not written in the Torah. And the verse hangs it, if you will. Rashi, the Gemara language of the Gemara, bechud hasa'ara. It's dangling by a hair. There's a hair in the Torah, one dangling hair in the Torah that alludes to this. Moshe Amru, as the Gemara in Chagiga says, heter nidarim. The whole concept that we are allowed to be matir and neder is parchim ba'avir. It's something that literally is floating in the sky. The whole concept. There's nowhere in the Torah that we have not any hint or allusion or whatever to this whole concept of Hatarat Nedarim. It's strictly an oral tradition that is handed down. Ella Sharamas Lo HaKatuv, it's hinted to in the verse, Lo Yachel Devaro, he should not, again, Yachel Devaro, he should not change his words. Kilomer Shalo Amar Shalo Yavor Al Devaro. The pasuk doesn't say Lo Yavor Al Devaro. He should not transgress his words. Avol Tziva Shalo Yechalel Devaro. He should not make his word Shalo Yaseh Neder Chilul. He should not make his neder something ordinary, something normal, average. Kibevo Ola Betin, by forcing him to go to a court. The Yimtzulo Petach, and they have to find an opening. The Nicham Olav, he has to regret that he made the oath. V'hem Yimchalulo, and they now forgive it, if they abrogate it for him. Einu Mechaleloto, he does not make it ordinary. By going, he understands the gravity of the oath, and that's why he has to approach the Bet Din to nullify it. He can't say, I don't feel like doing it. Okay, he has to go through a formal procedure because of the severity, and that's exactly what this is all to teach us. As I explained, that this is one of the hidden secrets of the Torah. Should not be taught to the whole public. Should only be taught to the judges who need to know. And that's why it's written down only with a hint of the slightest allusion to it. It's not written. There's no law that says if you make an oath and you don't feel like doing it, you can go. You've changed your mind. You had charata that you made this oath. You go to a court. All of that is part of the oral tradition. Okay, now Ramban once again address why is the parsha here? Why do we have this whole section here? Isn't this something we needed earlier? Why now at the last minute, as they're about to go into Eretz Yisrael, do we suddenly have this law of Nedarim? Uba parsha zot bechan. The reason it's written here, shehizkir nidre gavoha, because we mentioned just in the end of last week's parsha, we just mentioned that a person is allowed to make a pledge to give a korban. And we talked about them. That pasuk we quoted before. That the musafim, the karbanot musafim that we bring communally, are in addition to any private individual karbanot that are brought during the period of the chagim, that a person made a pledge to bring a karban. Amar od, milvad elah nidarim hanizkarim. He said, and so this law today, it's not like we saw before, that it's a continuation of that. In addition to the fact that I can bring a pledge, I can make a pledge to bring a karban, Ramat said there's an additional law. Yesh od nidre hedyot. There are other nidarim that I can make. I can make an oath by taking a certain oath. I can make something that is permitted, forbidden to me. So in addition to taking an animal and sanctifying it and bringing it as a karban, I have that ability through my power of my speech. I also have the power through my power of speech, I can take something that's perfectly permitted, perfectly kosher, and make it into something that's not kosher by saying I won't eat it or I won't benefit from it or whatever I might say. So the person has an obligation, just like a person has an obligation to fulfill the oath that he brought to bring the animal, to bring the karban, so too, he has an obligation, kol asher asor al nafsho. Anything he forbids himself, he should not go and say, no, I didn't really mean it. Ubechulan, and in every time a person pledges to do something positive or says, or says, I'm not going to get any benefit or eat something, Lo yachel dvaro, he alone is not allowed to change what he said. Aval acherim mochalim lo, but a court, others, individuals, are allowed to get him to out of this. So in other words, we have this whole procedure. But again, according to Ramban, unlike Rashi, who says, no, we got to teach it to everybody. According to Ramban, it was only taught originally to the tribal heads. Later, obviously, it trickles down to the people. They learn it, but the intent is only, this is not a law that we're supposed to be publicizing that everybody should know so that they should make light of Nidarim. You have to treat Nidarim when you say something. You have to treat it with the proper approach and proper respect. Please, Kuni. Okay. Now, Rosh Matot. Why is this taught only to the leaders of the tribes? That they should be the ones who transmit it to people. Unlike all the other halachot, where Moshe teaches first the tribal leaders, then he teaches the people, this halacha, according to Chizkuni, was taught only to the tribe, by Moshe, only to the tribal leaders, and they had the job to teach it, to get it spread among the people. Now, there are those who want to say that this parsha is slightly out of order. It didn't happen until after the war that we're going to read about right after it. Now, at the end of the war against Midian, we read also a section that says that the tribes of Reuven and Gad came to Moshe and they asked to be given the land on the east bank of the Jordan as their inheritance. And Moshe makes a deal with them that they have to fulfill certain conditions. They accept upon themselves that they will go out and fight in front of Am Yisrael. Otherwise, Moshe says, no, there's no deal here. Okay, so therefore, they needed to know before Moshe makes this deal with them what they were getting themselves into. So we had to know the laws of Nidarim had to be taught before we got to the point of them inheriting the land. And that's why it's here. That's why it's taught here. Perish Rashi now Chizki goes, Rashi explains, okay, all the other mitzvot were taught also by Moshe to all Am Yisrael, just like this one, according to Rashi. Pasuk says, Mishtoi beredet Moshe min hahar b'yom HaKippurim, uviyado kol mitzvot shenitnu b'Sinai. Since that verse is taught that Hashem taught Moshe, that Moshe teaches Aaron and all of the tribal heads, and then the whole congregation is taught when Moshe came down from Har Sinai. Od Pirish, another explanation. Umar ra'o lomar kan, why is this here? Kilomar, ma ra'a Moshe Rabbeinu lomar kan lashon zeh shel Roshei Matot livnei Yisrael. Why does it say, why did it just say Roshei Matot? Why Roshei Matot livnei Yisrael? Kan b'parshat Nidarim. Here in the parshat Nidarim. Why specifically here? Lilmo b'mena shar dibrod, to teach us all the others. Mistayel l'meimari, which comes to tell us Vayidaber Moshe livnei Yisrael, that Moshe speaks to all of Am Yisrael, ish ki yidor neder. It should have said just Vayidaber Moshe livnei Yisrael. V'leima lashon zeh shel Roshei Matot livnei Yisrael gabi mitzvah acheret. Why does it have to be here with the law of Nidarim? Why couldn't it have been with some other mitzvot? The Nilmud Shar Dibrot began Parshat Nidarim Yimenu. In other words, it had to be written once. Why does it seem to be the last time here? According to Rashi's commentary, who says that this was the norm. The norm was Moshe taught Aaron, he taught this, and then he teaches the tribal heads, then he teaches Am Yisrael. If that's the case, why did it wait all the way till here to teach it? And Rashi's answer was, Alamit Shafar Nidarim B'Yachid Mumchem in Rosh Hamatod. Ubishlosha had Yotot, and the fact that a betin of three ordinary people can also do Hatarat Nidarim is from El B'nai Yisrael. It says El B'nai Yisrael. In other words, Moshe Rosh Hamatod Livnei Yisrael. Ki detani hatam Aaron uvana v'chol Yisrael b'parshat Nidarim l'may hilchata. Why do I need all of Am Yisrael to be involved in the laws of Nidarim? Amar Acha Bar Yaakov lahachshir shlosha hadyotot vein Roshei Hamatot. Lahachshir shlosha hadyotot, to allow any three ordinary people to do Hatarat Nidarim. I think more asked there Amar Roshei Hamatot. See, if it says only the tribal leaders, Amar Avtis Amar Yochanan b'Yachid Mumcha. That teaches us the law of Yachid Mumcha, which we talked about before. That there are two ways you can get a neder nullified. One is by going to a panel of three ordinary people. The other is by going to one leader. No, an expert. Mumcha is generally refers to as expert. Okay. Zadavar Sher Tzivo Hashem Davar zeh lo nitparish hecha nemar l'Moshe. We nowhere do we see in the Torah where Hashem commanded this whole law of Nedarim to Moshe. V'chein, and he says similarly, common nevuot. There are other places where Moshe says something and we don't hear, we don't see in where does Hashem teach him this. Kigon, Kol Hashem to Makat Arba. There's nowhere that Moshe is instructed to bring the plague of Arba, except he says, Kol Hashem, that the plague is coming. Ukigon, Kol Hashem Kakatzot Halayla. Similarly, the plague of Makat Bechorot. Moshe announces it to Paro, even though there's nowhere where Hashem says, there's no way that Hashem Moshe or go tell Paro about the plague of Makat Bechorot. Ukigon, Simosh Chabral Yerechot Gabe Egel, by the Egel, where Moshe tells the Bnei Levi to go out and carry out the judgment of Hashem against those who worship the Egel. The Od, Harbei Nevi'im Nitnabu B'Kol Mar Hashem, we find many places where a Navi will say Kol Mar Hashem, and we won't have written in the Navi that Hashem tells the Navi to say this. We don't find that. Concerning these types of things, it says that Hashem always fulfills the words that are in the mouths of the prophets, which is a very important, very interesting little thought to end. Because I realize my time is up already. Time is flying here. But the fact is that if we look at this whole parsha, yes, we have this whole Nedarim, this whole concept of Torah Nedarim, but we also have this concept that Iskuni is ending with here, that when a Navi says something, Hashem will try to make it come true if it is at all possible. In other words, to make sure to keep the faith of the people in the Navi when it is Navi Emet, Hashem will be Mekayim the words of the Navi, even if he didn't command them beforehand. Because again, and there are two different ways of looking at this. One is the fact that the Navi, we know because of the Navi's ability or their closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they are generally able to understand or to be able to figure out what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants in a certain situation, or because Hashem has Kiviyachol given this Navi carte blanche, and there's a whole discussion among the Parshanim. What does that mean that the Navi is given carte blanche? If you really want to go into that more, I would suggest studying the whole story about Eliyahu Navi when he announces there's going to be a drought, and there's a whole discussion. Where do you get that from? Did Hashem really want to do that or not? It's a great discussion. It's a great topic, not for tonight. So we're going to end here. But again, we end with Chazak, that we should conclude and we should be strengthen ourselves, and Hashem should strengthen Am Yisrael in the current Zmanim that we're going through, that we should be successful, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bless us, that we should be successful over our enemies, and we should not have to go through learning all about the calamities that have fallen us during this period of Bein HaMetzarim as we go forward, and it should be, the Nevuah should be fulfilled, that all of these days will be changed to days of Yom Tov, with the coming of Mashiach B'Meher V'Yameinu. Thank you all. I open up now for questions, comments, feedback. Anybody? Yes.
And she makes about the father heard about it in another place.
Yes.
Can you repeat the question, please?
1 minute. 1 minute. It's still being asked, Jackie. I will. I'm sorry. What?
Applies also to
Okay. Maurice's question was: we have the whole concept of a father is allowed to. I don't want to use the word nullify because it's not fair to basically uproot an oath made by a minor daughter or a somewhat major daughter. Not again at certain stages in her life if she's not married and she. Okay. However, his question is: does that also apply to a son? And the answer is no. The answer is no. There's a special law of the Torah that a father is given certain rights to nullify, to uproot certain vows of his daughter. A husband is given the right to uproot certain vows of his wife. We never find a wife being able to uproot a husband or a father being allowed to uproot a son. Doesn't happen. That's the way the Torah wrote it. That's the way it is. Don't ask me why, how, or what. That's the way it is. Okay? Any other questions or comments? No, Jackie just wanted me to repeat your question, so I did. Okay, anybody else? If not,